Well, happy Friday, Rich Waller.
Hey, Sarah, great to see you as always. It's a beautiful Friday here in the wine country, so it's not a bad day.
Not a bad day. Gorgeous day here in Southwest Florida as well. Probably a little warmer where I am than where you are, but it's all right.
Yeah, I just came from down there. I was down in Miami this week, so it was
Oh,
definitely
nice.
warmer, but all good.
Yeah, very good. Well, I like to start with a little bit of an introduction. Tell whoever may be listening a little bit about you, a little bit about what you're doing today, and then we'll just jump in and see where the conversation takes us.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I've been in and around healthcare enterprise data strategy now for the better part of about 15 years. So, as you know, was one of the founders of VisEquate and a great, amazing team there. And currently leading a company, WellStack. We're focused a lot around kind of helping provider organizations unify their clinical, financial, operational data assets into a foundation that really helps enable everything they're trying to do strategically with data analytics, AI, machine learning. That's kind of, I'm just like a self-proclaimed healthcare data fanatic and probably be doing that for the rest of my career.
Yeah, awesome. And we see each other from time to time at conferences. We always have really good debates about our respective perspectives on what's going on in our organizations, what's going on in the market. And I know you're very passionate about data and the insights that data brings to specifically providers, but can you just give a little bit of a brief overview as to why is this so hard?
Yeah. So the reason that I think it's difficult is, if you look at, how a healthcare organization operates and the number of different systems, the number of different teams, things that have to come together in order to get to basically even just a foundation of data to drive quality analytics and trusted insights. There's a lot that has to happen, right? There's EHR systems, there's finance systems, there's ERP, operational, a lot of stuff, and not only within that, and not only that, but within that, healthcare data is also very complex. We run a very complex coding system, both on the clinical side, the financial side. And so what it does, it creates just a ton of disparity that has to be cleansed, normalized, grouped into even just coherent data objects that can be leveraged for analytics. So that's one of the biggest reasons it's hard. And then, to do that, you have to be able to, bring in a pretty sophisticated, multi skill set type of team to be able to pull it together. So, for provider health systems, or health systems, IDNs, et cetera, it is a very big problem.
Mm-hmm. And obviously we've talked a lot about revenue cycle because that's where VisEquate was. That's obviously where I was. And I know that you have some thoughts on just how different rev cycle and clinical data sets are and how hard it is to get those groups to understand each other. Because if I remember one conversation you had, you were solely focused on clinical, and then you're like, and then here I was having a conversation about rev cycle kind of totally unintentionally. So do you have any thoughts on how to teach those two sides of the healthcare spectrum, how to understand each other, just data needs or just their businesses better?
Well, I think more and more as we, continue to, I don't know how quickly or slowly, we're moving and maybe even taking steps forward or backward in the transition to value-based care. Those two worlds are, more and more intertwined, right? And so, and I candidly have, arguably always should have been, right? In terms of, if you look at the way that clinical processes and indicators are the leading indicators for what's going to happen financially for the organization and those types of things, right? And so, as those things come together into, things like shared savings or, pay for performance, there's a lot of crossover that happens. And I think that, many times payer analytics teams at organizations are starting to bring, those two groups together to be able to better understand, what's happening clinically that's affecting, that not only sort of the population risk and things that will lead to shared savings or pay for performance and other things, but also the fact that the whole thing still runs on sort of that fee for service or rev cycle chassis from a claims and payer relationship perspective. It's really what we're trying to do is just kind of help with joining those data sets and creating data foundations that allow users first and foremost to be able to get insights very quickly across the aisle, if you will. And then we feel like that continues to, better support deeper collaboration between those teams.
Yeah, so obviously that's something that we're very passionate about at Trend, is that payer-provider collaboration. And very often we see those conversations really break down because people just argue over whose spreadsheet is correct, right? And then if you're arguing over that, nothing else is going to happen after that. So can you talk a little bit about, what progress you have seen at, if you've got some anecdotes or anything like that you can share with folks? Give us some hope. Give us some hope.
Yeah, and we work, predominantly on the health system side of things, and so, from our perspective, the things that we see, when we do, have conversations with the health plan side, with the provider side, is that, a balanced approach to, kind of effectively the contract being the center of, the source of truth, if you will, in a way, about the relationship, and then having the right data sources that sort of tie to those contract terms. At least it sets a foundation for a discussion, right? So that, again, there's less disagreement between whose spreadsheet is correct. But then also, I think that it's natural for both sides to sort of look towards the other side and their initiative in terms of where they start in terms of fixing, right? So like, as an example, if when we talk to providers, it's often the case that the first thing they're trying to detect is, misbehaving on the health plan side, right? And I think it goes vice versa, where you talk, to health plan, and it's like, well, we're really trying to make sure we first test out fraud, right? And then we can work on other things. And so I think that, but oftentimes a lot of what happens is, some of the provider processes are a big, kind of factor in, why they're getting denied or things like that. And so, coming in with a balanced approach where both sides are seeing, hey, there's lots of process improvement happening on the provider side to create, cleaner claims, to better, adhere to contract terms. We see those conversations going more productive for the provider often, even if it is, kind of focusing on their own process. I think, the health plans have expressed a lot of, I would say a lot of interest in, better, more productive conversations when they can see that, the both sides of the equation are being addressed in the strategies, not only just around data, but about operations and improvement.
Yeah. I mean, that's so consistent with what we see at Trend too. And, for me, if we can all agree that a lot of, I'm going to use the term red tape, right? Whether that's policy or procedure or systems or whatever, that a lot of red tape has been created because there have been bad actors on both sides. And if you can just acknowledge that and then think about, how do I show this other party that I am not a bad actor, right? And so the way that translates for us is thinking about, what can you do in your 20 square feet, right? It's you aren't necessarily in control of what's happening on the other side of the aisle, but you are in control of how do you show up for work, what mindset do you bring to those meetings, and think about your own 20 square feet. But that's a big mind shift. And I'm just curious, I know that you and I also have talked a lot about culture. Are you starting to see that mind shift take root in a lot of places? Is there something that we could do as an industry to help more of that mind shift? What is your current line of thinking on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's absolutely a lot of improvement. I mean, we've been in this space, again, across the course of the last 15 or so years. And so, I see a lot of improvement in that collaboration, I would say. I mean, I think that, our role in that is, making sure that we're equipping those teams with the insights that they need to have the most productive conversations, right? So whether it's just information about how well, they're performing on various initiatives, whether they're contract terms or just in general, how things are going, and then where they have concern, related to, certain aspects of denials management, or, even in terms of just the, in a kind of a shared savings or a pay for performance aspect, where are those, leading clinical quality indicators heading, so that when they're preparing for those discussions, they're better equipped to, have a productive conversation that's kind of more, I could say forward thinking, as much as just always focusing on the lagging indicators. So that's where we focus a lot in terms of just helping provide that good foundation for those conversations.
Yeah, and I know that you have some very strong philosophies about data aggregation, and that's really part of what you're so excited about at WellStack. So I want to give you the opportunity to, talk about the thing that you're super passionate about and what's different about WellStack's approach to that data that is driving those insights in those meetings that you're discussing.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of different philosophies that are coming into the market, and fundamentally there's been a big shift in with a lot of what the hyperscalers, particularly so Microsoft Azure, Google, Amazon's AWS, in terms of how do you set up a more agile data strategy, right? And so a lot of CIOs and tech teams within these organizations are moving down that path. And so what we're seeing and what our role is we want to make sure that those strategies are equipped with the right, call them accelerators, to be able to kind of cleanse, normalize, and join data at the foundation in a way that positions success for whatever the rest of the strategy is from a technology or from a process perspective. And so we spend a lot of time in the weeds around how do you map all of those code groups into unified definitions. How do you identify how do you define a diabetic patient? How do you define what is an A1C test? You'd be surprised at how many different ways that an A1C test within even a single EHR system, much less you have one or two instances, how many different ways that could be represented from a code perspective in data, right? So a lot of what we do is we tag and kind of normalize data so that those definitions at the analyst level are consistent. They're all playing off the same sheet of music, right? Because a lot of times what people are doing is pushing those mappings to the endpoints, where then you have your definition of a diabetic patient or your definition of an A1C test that's sort of stuck in the definition in Tableau or Power BI that maybe only that one set of analysts has access to. And one of the number one problems we hear from executives is the kind of, and it's been said for a long time, if I ask a question to my analysts, depending on how many analysts I have, that could be how many different answers I get to the same question, right? And so that's really what we try to solve is, with setting sort of that trusted AI ready, AI enabled foundation, you're going to have much more consistency. And as you can imagine, that problem of sort of like getting different answers on the same question compounds potentially exponentially when those consumers or that middle layer is AI, right? So one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that when you're giving a number of different AI agents or even AI applications, a foundational data set, that it at least has a consistent set of definitions and tags so that you're not getting completely different results with those AI agents.
Yeah, that sounds, great. Because I always say, like, we're drowning in data, but like starving for insights, right? Because to your point, you can get all wrapped up in this story, this data tells this story, this data tells that story. But I'm curious, from your point of view, and I do not hold you accountable for whatever you're about to say, this is just pure speculation, but you talked about the complexity of healthcare, which I completely understand, all the codifying that has to happen in order to satisfy our reimbursement and reporting systems. But I also have seen people take something that's very complicated and just continue to make it more complicated. And I'm curious, if you were to ballpark it from your point of view, how much of the complexity that you see is the result of just codifying of healthcare and it is what it is, and how much of that complexity is a bit self-inflicted?
So, I think that it's like all things, I think it's in layers, right? I think that there's, a lot of the codifying and issues that have to do with processes of the data entry or the systems of how that data is acquired and entered. So there's always that foundational layer, right? And if putting a percentage on it, I don't know, let's call it 50%, right, or something of the problem, maybe 25 to 50% of the problem is that. And then on top of that, where things I think also become a bit self-inflicted is how that data is organized, right? And so when you have data coming out of the back end of Epic and Cerner, there's a lot of, I would say, kind of semi industry inflicted complexity in those sources and things that compound the problem. And so, it's so there is that like multi-dimensional, cleansing and organizing of data. And then the thing is also that's interesting is the user layer also is maturing, right? So you've got, data analysts in healthcare. I'm often shocked at, how far that our industry has come in the last 10 years and just the talent that I see within our clients. I mean, there's been a lot of improvement with, what a data analyst and a data scientist can do, and again, as we get into more co-pilots and AI and stuff, that's only going to continue to increase. So I think that there's some exciting times ahead in the next, 5 years or so about, how we can start to, kind of, I would say, solve these gaps. But also just, I don't know that the data landscape in terms of complexity is really, going anywhere, but potentially more complex.
Yeah. And if you had maybe advice or something that you've seen in your clients that you would consider best practice or super innovative, is there anything that you would share that, hey, if you could do one or two things, I would start here?
Yeah. So, the thing that we see is, focusing on specific use cases that, we know we can continue to drive value and innovation, right? So use cases, I mean, that's nothing new. But, one of the best practices that we're seeing is when you have a joined foundation, specifically between the clinical data coming out of the EHR, you have then, think about it like traditional patient accounting, claims remits, and that data set that's historically drove RCM insights. And then you have the third-party claims data coming in that when you think about more holistically around a patient's cost or, utilization, you need that data, right? Because they're obviously consuming services and things outside of the immediate health system that you have. And so when you do have that as a foundation, as a strategy, and so some of the organizations we're working with, like Hartford Healthcare, Guthrie Clinic, others, are making that investment. What's interesting is if you think about today, what the view of a health system CFO looks like, right? You have your traditional, and think about it as like sort of a transition in or a collection of reimbursement models. You've got your traditional fee-for-service world. You've got some element of a Medicare Advantage, or you've got pay for performance. You've got shared savings. You've got all these things. In order to really have a even close to clear picture about what's happening in your organization, you have to have those data sets rolling up to be able to show how they interact with each other, how they affect with each other, and then the operational indicators that connect them so you can see and even come close to forecasting where you're going. So, I would say that's the forward-thinking organizations that we see are making that investment. And then, I think it also helps them move about 5 to 10 times faster with adopting AI and other things and automation on top of that foundation.
Yeah, that's really great guidance. And, healthcare doesn't have a great reputation in change management and innovation and forward thinking. Do you think AI is going to help us get better at that? Or do you think we're going to continue to lag behind other industries in our adoption of change?
I think that AI, that you have to think of AI as sort of a, the best case right now to think about is AI is a way to, shorten the adoption cycle with many things. I mean, we've been giving users insights, analytics, et cetera, for, decades really, right? And especially within the last decade. But the gap between the insight and action loop is often the big barrier to really driving value or driving, I would say, maturity within the organizations in terms of automation. And I think that AI is fantastic at filling that gap, right? The sort of insight to action gap. So having a co-pilot that is guiding, based on the action, what is the next step? What is the next, best action? And then eventually, kind of automating that feedback loop. I do think that we are going to see acceleration within the healthcare industry. I also am encouraged by, a lot of the investment from the venture community, where historically, healthcare has been perceived as probably a little bit messy, and like the scale wasn't quite there compared to maybe some other industries where you had a huge influx of venture and private equity dollars. I do think that will help collapse the historic lag, which is probably maybe 10 years or more in terms of us behind other industries. But I do still think that there's going to continue to be some element of a lag, just because of the regulatory environment and things that are just going to be difficult to fully overcome in terms of the speed at which some other industries move.
Yeah. And is there anything that you have seen lately that and again, you don't have to get specific, but is there anything that you have seen lately that really gives you hope?
Yeah, so I mean, I think some of the swarm technology around agentic AI is actually really interesting to me, because I think it's starting to, it's starting to be able to break down like fundamental work units into things that can be solved quickly, and then those agents being able to communicate with each other, I think will eliminate a lot of the things that I think we've been leveraging humans to do that's just inefficient, right? And so I think that technology is finally starting to be there in a way where we can start to really see some of these administrative back office things. And not only just because you can do these things, because I mean, the classic thing is just leveraging AI to do broken processes better. Right. It's like, there's some incremental utility there, but I think over time, some of those things can actually be streamlined and completely changed by that type of technology. So I'm encouraged by that. I also think that technology could potentially lighten or lessen the grip that EHR systems have as the center of our process, right? I mean, I think that they start to enable a more headless type EHR environment. What I mean by that is like not everything being manually entered through a screen every time you're going in by a highly skilled, labor, physician or a skilled nurse, a nurse practitioner or others. I think that technology will allow us to move potentially away from such an EHR centric environment.
Yeah, but it sounds to me like you're describing a world where, in the course of my career anyway, the focus has been on getting data and insights at the executive level, or kind of like that upper level management level, so that they can interpret that information and make decisions and then pass information or requests or orders or whatever down inside the organization. But what I'm hearing you say, if I'm understanding you correctly, is you feel like that may shift where the insights are going to happen at that entry level, and that entry level is going to have a little bit of more empowerment to grow and evolve. And I'm thinking rev cycle because that's our frame of reference. But am I on the right track? Do you agree with my interpretation of what you just said?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the goal has always been sort of, data liquidity, democratizing insights and recommendations at the lowest level of granularity to drive process, right? And I think naturally, that direction has kind of gone top down, but I think that there's definitely the opportunity to inject throughout all levels of the organization in a much more efficient way.
Yeah. But that is going to require a lot of culture change and a lot of leadership change. So I'm curious if we can switch gears a little bit from the data and technology side of the equation to the human side of the equation. Like, what do you see as a barrier to that from a culture or just leadership style that's going to prohibit that exponential growth?
Yeah, no, I think that, the things we've been talking about are all tools, right, in the process, right? So data and, AI and all these things. But, I think that, I wouldn't say I have any massively new thinking here, but I think that, collaboration is really what breaks down, or it starts to break down silos. 'Cause healthcare, I think naturally is almost designed from a process perspective to operate in silos, right? And so, you know, the way that everything you just think about, like clinical and financial and operational, we talk about them in silos. We organize teams around them in silos. We do those things, and so I think that if you leverage these tools to, you know, better connect people, and you have leadership that really values and sort of emphasizes and provides the right environment for collaboration, you know, that's where you'll see a lot of those bridges get built between those organizations, which I think is, you know, the key to success. And people often talk about, you know, data bridges and things like that, but I don't know that that's as relevant as just like the culture of seeking and wanting to have that collaboration is really what will make or break it, because you could have the best technology or data bridges, but if you don't have the, you know, the culture that's driving that change or driving that kind of urgency, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. And it's such a hard thought process to change, right? If you have shown up for work every day, looking kind of up the org chart, waiting for someone to tell you what to do, or, you know, whatever that is, and thinking, and your whole orientation is around your silo, right? What is in the best interest of my silo? What KPI am I responsible for in my silo? It's a really tough transition to retrain your brain to think, you know, kind of across an organization. Do you have, because I see your bookshelf back there, because, you know, I'm a big reader. Do you have a recommended reading or a recommended process that someone may want to go on this journey and be like, hey, I want to think differently about the way that I show up for work?
You know, I've been, you know, one of them that I think is really, really good. So I have a couple, and I do read a lot, as you know. There's a book called Working Backwards that talks about how Amazon has done a lot of what it does, right? And what I love about how Amazon has approached these things is, you know, they have, I think, just been very, very relentless about processes that bring teams together and execute efficient work, right? So like one of the best books on business kind of collaboration and how to organize around difficult problems has been that. I was just actually reading another one about NVIDIA. So I read a lot of just, you know, biographies and, you know, other company examples. I find the most like real world tidbits out of them. Also very, very good. And you know, there's also, there's another book called The Exponential Organization that I think is really good. It just gives like totally fresh new thinking about how we should maybe be approaching business in a world that, you know, where we have the tools that are in front of us. I think it's hard, you know, sometimes for us to, you know, I would say move away from just the things that we all started in business using in terms of tools and and realizing that a lot of things that are coming with AI and just even, you know, kind of other tools available to us from a collaboration perspective and, you know, things like that are just evolutions of the things that, you know, we grew up with in many ways. So those are just, you know, some examples.
Those are great suggestions. And I mean, full confession, I'm going to date myself, but I still use a paper notebook. Like my system of how I take notes, of how I track, you know, what is for me to do, what is for somebody else to do, what is the next step. Like I have tried so many times to digitize that, and I fail miserably because I'm so anchored to that process, right? Like we're creatures of habit. So I totally understand that point of view. I am curious, just kind of, let's go one step further in the reading and kind of the personal enrichment and leadership development. Do you have other recommended, like what's the book that kind of really resonated with you, that kind of rocked you to the point where you're like, oh, I got to think about the world very differently? Do you have one that you would share?
You know, there's so many dimensions to these things, right? I mean, like I read a lot around, you know, just like very technical things and, you know, things that are focused around, you know, all the things in our domain. And so I think that as just a continuous learner has always been very valuable. You know, one book that's pretty interesting that I think is there's a book called Never Eat Alone. And what's interesting about that one is I think it pushes everybody, about just the value of networking but networking in a way that's very focused, right, in terms of what you're trying to achieve. But then also, one of the biggest takeaways in that is, in every networking opportunity, you should strive for an exchange of value, right? So if you go into, opportunities to discuss and have conversations with others, working hard on what you can do for them is often the most valuable in terms of, building those relationships that lead to successful, either business opportunities or client, kind of value creation and things like that. So that's one that I recommend to almost everybody, especially, people coming out of college and things that are looking to build careers. It's, the just kind of being, I would say, iterative and relentless, not necessarily impatient, but just really building the network and understanding, how much you can learn from others and approaching interactions on, you can learn from anybody that you talk to, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you go in, with that attitude and that approach, I think it helps build lasting relationships in business and personally and everything. So that would be one.
Yeah, I think it's great guidance, and I would say for anyone listening, I can attest that Rich walks that talk. Honestly, we have collaborated on a lot of things. There's been times that I have asked you, hey, can you help me with this? And you've absolutely done it. You've done the same thing. Hey, can I pick your brain about whatever? And I think, when people think about relationships in a transactional nature, which is what am I going to get from this? Everything just kind of breaks down, right? And it's more about, I care about you. I want you to be successful. How can I bring something of value in our relationship and vice versa? And if business happens, great. If it doesn't, then I feel enriched, and I've thought about something in a different way. And I think that is how we all just create so much energy and positive outcomes in the industry. It's awesome.
Absolutely. And vice versa. You, Sarah, you're always so fantastic in these areas. And so, one of my first calls every time I'm trying to figure something out, in business and in culture and life. So I always appreciate the friendship.
Awesome. Right back at you. Well, I always want to give our guests an opportunity to ask me questions. I put you on the hot seat, and 30 minutes goes by so fast. What questions do you have, or for me, or is there anything that you just want to share and discuss that we haven't covered?
I would love to know from your perspective, when you think about, you're at the center of sort of the, that you mentioned it, right? The payer and provider intersection. What are you seeing that's exciting, either from a technology perspective or solution perspective, that, could potentially be like a big shift in that environment in terms of how that health plans and providers, collaborate towards a more efficient reimbursement approach?
Yeah, I think the thing that gets me the most excited, and I actually just talked to somebody else about this the other day, but the thing that gets me the most excited, which has also been one of the things that challenged and a long-held ideology for me, is, the interactions that I have on the payer side are all about provider abrasion. Payers get up every day and think about how will a provider react to fill in the blank, right? And providers don't necessarily have that same mindset. I don't know any provider that has a payer abrasion committee. I think that if we can, what gets me excited is I continue to see positive momentum in that collaboration between payers and providers where they are trying to figure it out. And, there's more pressure, I think, more pressure on players in this space that are making that worse instead of better, which gives me hope that people are just kind of tired of how things have been going. They're much more open to new solutions, whether that solution is a service or a technology or a relationship or whatever. I think people are recognizing, hey, this isn't working and we need to do something different. And that makes me excited. I think we talked a little bit about AI. AI gets me excited. Just what I have seen, not just internally in my organization, but out in the world on both the payer and the provider side, is people are really trying to think about how to use it and get the most value out of it. Some people are nervous, right? They're taking conservative approaches. They're thinking about governance, which is good. But I also think the way that we think about AI just continues to evolve, and I have a head of AI. His name's Casey Sousa, and I've learned a lot from him, and he has shaped a lot about how I think about AI. But he would actually say AI is not a tool. And so he has kind of flipped the script on me a little bit in that we should see AI, that agentic AI, as an extension of our human capital, right? Like that's a person. We have agentic AI at Trend that we call Tia, and we talk about her like she's a person. Like, what's Tia do? Can Tia help us with this? So I think the more we think about that, and less about, I just want to offload some data entry, low level things, right? Which is where I think people kind of started thinking about AI. I'm excited to see where it takes us.
Yeah, that absolutely, and I think that there's so much exploration going on right now that is going to yield some interesting things. I think, to your point, that there's organizations that are taking a cautious approach, which I think is natural. But I think that there's the architectures are getting figured out where I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to equip organizations to run these AI experiments very, very quickly within within their strategy, and reduce the friction really for them. I think is the key to broader adoption.
Yeah, I would say one of, and I will not use any names, but one of the most exciting days for me lately was we have automated letter generation, appeal letter generation. And so we were on the phone with a payer, and we were showing them like, hey, you, based on your policy, you could write a denial letter requesting information, and we could automatically generate a letter. So we could give you a preemptive letter of what the provider's appeal letter would likely look like. And then you could decide, do you actually want to send that denial or not? Is it worth it? And so and that particular payer's eyes got great big, and they were like, oh my gosh, like, is that real? Can we do that? And the Sarah, the rev cycle Sarah, the old Sarah that was really just anchored on the provider side, would never have believed that a payer had interest in not actually sending that denial letter. You know what I mean? So that has been very exciting for us. Awesome. Well, Rich, thank you so much. I love spending my Friday afternoon with you. Enjoy the beautiful weather out there in sunny wine country, and I hope to pay you a visit in person soon.
Absolutely. Thanks again. It's been great.
Thanks. Have a great weekend.